You're listening to Psych with Mike. And remember, the book, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, has a ton more information in it that is corollary to the things that we talk about here on Psych with Mike. So pick up a copy and leave us a review on Amazon. That is super helpful. Subscribe to Psych with Mike on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts, and leave us a review on Apple if you would like, and that really helps out the show. And now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. I am Dr. Michael Mahan. Do you want to feel better psychologically, emotionally, and physically? Then you're listening to the right podcast. So stay with me till the end of this pod and let me know how you feel about this information and if you have any questions. If you like the content you get on Psych with Mike, then please subscribe to us on YouTube or the audio podcast at Apple. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Buy our book, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, and that is available on Amazon. I will leave a link in the description below. And if you do pick up the book, please leave us a review on Amazon, because that not only helps out us, but it also helps other people find the book. So if you want to feel better psychologically, emotionally, and physically, then what I need for you to do is to understand the concept of cognitive dissonance. So what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance psychologically is explained by the difficulty that the human brain has in holding two conflicting thoughts simultaneously. So whenever I have two conflicting thoughts in my brain, one of the examples that I use frequently is asking someone out on a date. I work with a lot of adolescent males, and it is extremely common for individuals to come to my office and say, hey, I would like to ask Sally out on a date. And so I say, well, that's great. When do you plan to do that? Oh, I don't know, because I'm afraid that she is going to reject me. So now I have two conflicting thoughts. I want to ask Sally out on a date, but I'm afraid that if I do, that she's going to say no. And so what ends up happening is that I now live my life in a perpetual Schrodinger experiment, so that all of my options are available to me at all times. So what does it mean to live your life as a perpetual Schrodinger experiment? So Erwin Schrodinger was a physicist who proposed a mental experiment that is called Schrodinger's cat. So you've probably heard the term Schrodinger's cat. What does that refer to? That refers to this mental experiment that Schrodinger described, where he said, if you take a cat and you put a cat in a box along with a contraption that is going to detonate a cyanide capsule at some random time that you don't know and don't control, and you close the box, 5 minutes later, is the cat alive or dead? And the answer is that the cat is both. The cat lives in in a space that physicists called superposition, where all of its options are available simultaneously. So the cat is both alive and dead from your perspective until you open the box. And so that's what we do, is that we live in these self-created perpetual Schrodinger experiments where we keep all of our options open at the same time, so that we don't ever have to deal with the fact that any of those options are no longer available to us. So going back to my explanation of the young man coming to my office, what he does is keeps all of his options open at the same time. He never asks Sally out, so there's always the potential that he could and she would say yes. And he never has to deal with the rejection, the anxiety, the depression that rejection could create. And so all of his options are open at the same time, but the sacrifice is that he never goes out with Sally. And if we play this out long term, may never build up the courage to ask anyone out, and so may never go out with anyone. And we do this all the time in our lives. And when we do this, what we experience as a result is anxiety. So the energy created in the human brain by these conflicting thoughts rubbing up against each other, the friction that's created by that is what we experience as human beings as anxiety. So anxiety, unless it's fear-based, and I make a big deal about this in the book, and I try and explain this very completely when I'm talking to clients and when I'm talking to you guys. So a fear-based anxiety is a phobia, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. These are fear-based anxieties, and they operate differently in the human brain. So whenever someone says, I'm feeling anxious, if you are a therapist or just some layperson who wants to understand this better, the first question you have to ask yourself and ask the other person is this a fear-based anxiety or not? Fear-based anxieties have specific error correction anomalies that happen in the brain that cause those fear-based anxieties. That's different than a non-fear-based anxiety. So a non-fear-based anxiety would be a phobia, not a phobia, would be a generalized anxiety disorder or something that falls along that spectrum. So the non-fear-based anxieties are created by cognitive dissonance. Whenever you have two conflicting thoughts and you don't resolve them, and we're going to talk more about resolving them next week. But whenever you have two conflicting thoughts in your brain, the friction of that, those rubbing together, is what we experience as non-fear-based anxieties. So all non-fear-based anxieties are controllable by the individual. You can learn how to reduce your non-fear-based anxiety. You can learn how to reduce your cognitive dissonance. This is not an imbalance of neurotransmitters in your brain. So when we talk about depression and we talk about medications that treat depression, those medications actually manipulate neurotransmitters that we associate with depression, like norepinephrine, like serotonin, like dopamine. These neurotransmitters can actually physiologically cause what we call depression. There's no neurotransmitter imbalance that causes non-fear-based anxieties. That is a complete cognitive process. It's a process going on in your brain. So I don't want to jump on, right? Don't want to dogpile on the idea that it's all in your head. But the truth is that non-fear-based anxieties are in your brain. They are the result of cognitive dissonance, of trying to hold two conflicting thoughts simultaneously. So if we resolve the cognitive dissonance I had mentioned before, that can make you feel better psychologically, it can make you feel better emotionally, it can make you feel better physically. So why is that? Because as long as I'm creating that cognitive dissonance, I don't have as many mental resources to invest in other areas of my life. I don't have good emotional balance and emotional regulation, and my hormone levels are based on the release of stress-related hormones, namely cortisol and adrenaline. So if I resolve my cognitive dissonance, if I minimize that friction and therefore the anxiety, minimize the friction of the thoughts rubbing up against each other, and therefore reduce my level of anxiety, then I have more mental resources that I can invest in other areas of my life. I am better emotionally balanced and emotionally regulated, and I reduce the overall amounts of stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, that are present in my body. I may even promote the release of hormones that actually have to do with feeling good, like oxytocin and endorphins and or enkephalins. So there's so much positive that comes out of resolving our cognitive dissonance, that comes out of being able to reduce the amount of friction that's created by conflicting thoughts in our brains. The problem is that it requires consistency, and this is the rub with so many things. If you want to lose weight, you can reduce the number of calories that you put into your body. You can go to the gym and you can work out, and you will lose weight. It is a guarantee. There are a few physiological conditions that cause people to not be able to lose weight. Those are relatively rare. For the average person, we know how to lose weight. So if we don't lose the weight, then that's because we aren't being consistent enough. So we may go to the gym a handful of times. This happens every New Year's. People make New Year's resolutions. I'm going to get in shape. And statistics show us that those last about 3 weeks when people then revert back to their old behavior, because consistency is hard. I can't just eat balanced diets once. I can't just go to the gym 3 days and then be in perfect health for the rest of my life. It requires consistency. And the same thing is true if we're going to confront our own cognitive dissonance. We can do that a few times and feel better, but unless we do it consistently, we're not going to see long-term rewards. And the problem that I have with that from a psychological perspective, when people come to my office, is they'll say, hey, psychotherapy doesn't work. And that's because they've been taught the tools that I'm teaching you, and yet they don't apply them consistently. And so they say, okay, psychotherapy doesn't work. When in reality, what's not working is that individual's ability to apply the things that they have learned consistently. So again, we're going to cover how you reduce your cognitive dissonance next week, but know in your mind, know already, be warned, that that requires consistency to be effective. Again, don't forget we have a book out, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human. We would love for you to pick up a copy. The link will be in the description below. If you do pick up a copy, as I'm sure all of you will, please leave us a review on Amazon. That is so appreciated and so helpful. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.